Alan, thanks for being back. Welcome to everybody who's here. Thank you for tuning in and registering. This is popular for a reason because Alan is super creative, and I love watching how he approaches how to engage with creativity, solve problems, and have fun, and use tools to do it at the same time. So with that in mind, Alan, why are we doing this together? What's on your mind?
Well, I don't know about you, but I've been extra stressed lately, and I felt the need to share how I get myself out of that. And there are times where I need to be perfect. And, during my day job, when I'm working or when I'm on assignment and there are clients around and they expect perfection. But then there are times where I want to be absolutely imperfect, and I want to be spontaneous, and I want to experiment, and I want to play. And that works for me for a lot of reasons. It helps me clear my head. It eliminates all the stress that we're all dealing with, pandemic, organizational, governmental, anything that worries us.
Yeah.
I want to get rid of. I want to clear my head. It's also great practice. So I'm always looking to up my game and make sure that I'm as good as I can be. And so I've got that balance of practice making perfect and also practice making imperfect, because sometimes we want to just be open to being spontaneous and experimenting. And that's what today's going to be about. This is almost like photography improv, because as much as I know what I want to communicate and what I want to share, because it's fun and it's easy, and I'm going to show you how easy it is, there is a lot of what I'm going to be sharing today that is totally unpredictable, which is magic. So
you're planning to not plan to plan.
Exactly.
Yes. I love it. I love it. And there's a lot of room for discovery and fun in there. So I'm going to get out of the way. Alan, where do we start on this journey of creativity?
Okay, so first I'm going to, let me just give everyone an overview. I'm going to share my screen because I've got a lot of prepared things. Then I'm going to come back live and I'm going to show you how to do things. And then at the very, 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 very end, for a few minutes, we're going to talk about what I use to create the thing. So the gear and how important the gear is. And I'm going to say up front, without giving plugs, because this is not a sales pitch, gear matters. And the better the gear, the more precisely I am able to work. It just frees me up to be creative and to be spontaneous. I'm not worrying about things not holding and not working. So that's why gear matters to me. But let me share my screen and I'll give you a sense of what I'm talking about. And let's see, I got to click here and I got to click there. And now hopefully you can see my screen. Matt, give me a confirming yes.
Yes, sir. We can see it.
Excellent. Okay. So this is titled Finding Zen with a Lightbox. It could also be Frolicking with a Lightbox. And the Lightbox I use is made by Kaiser. We'll talk about more later. And this is sort of what I'm going to show you how to do. So stick around because we're going to get to things like this, and then a little bit of this, and then some of this, and that, and other things. And where it started for me was this. A lot of people who are here know me as a macro photographer. I love shooting flowers. I also love shooting all sorts of things, food and portraits and whatever, but flowers are beautiful and calming. And again, this whole thing is about Zen and relaxing. So this is where I started with my Lightbox. I would take flowers and I would throw them down or prop them up and put my Lightbox behind them. And I would see what comes up. And invariably I would start having conversations with them, because I like to, if there's no one around to talk to, I talk to myself and I talk to my subjects, whether they're animate or inanimate. And I start making up conversations between the subjects and looking to anthropomorphize things and looking for gestures. And part of this is just compositional exercise. It's practice for other things. It's seeing how to lay things out on a page. It's sometimes just documenting things. As this tulip was aging and growing old gracefully and not so much, it took on this curve and I had to capture it. And ultimately it became something that is now in the Hospital for Special Surgery in New York. Somehow they got hold of this and also this, and it became decoration for the walls, which is where we all want to be. We want to take something that we love and are passionate about, and then we want to potentially, hopefully, monetize it. Sometimes it's just about, taking the detritus of what I've got and laying it out. And then it becomes a creative exercise. Can I make things look more painterly, more creative? This is all done on a Lightbox with just a little bit of extra post-processing in Lightroom. Back to compositional exercises. And remember, it's not just color, it's black and white, but looking at how things relate to each other and looking at the relationships and scale. And this is all practice for becoming a better photographer. And, whether this is the fact that this is just an inanimate object, the practices I'm applying here apply to portraiture and apply to group portraiture and environmental portraiture, and looking at all of the aspects of what I'm seeing through the viewfinder and having them make sense or not make sense. So that's some of it. In other cases, it's accidental. I've got flowers, and sometimes as they're growing old, I happen to drop this ranunculus onto my Lightbox as I was trying to gently place it down, and it exploded, and it led me to something really fun. And so that became its own series, going through very quickly. Again, back to just documenting pretty things. And invariably, I get to things like this that I may use later in other compositions. Sometimes it becomes a bigger, more elaborate exercise where I just want the minimalist, modernist approach of being on white. And so, as opposed to shooting on a textured surface or a pretty surface of some sort, sometimes I just want to strip everything away so that the elements themselves become the stars with no distraction. And sometimes I just want to see what I see through my lens. And in cases like this, I'm always collecting things that are somewhat translucent because they fascinate me. Being able to see through things is something that, as a kid, I wish I had, sort of the ability to see through walls. I think it was a Superman thing. And then it lets me be playful. I recently started collecting tiny little figurines because I wanted to see what was possible. This is some Himalayan pink salt thrown on the Lightbox, and I just thought I'd throw a character down. This is, I was doing a study on iced tea, literally, and sort of it's truly iced tea. And then I threw the blocks down on the Lightbox with some tea bags and honey, and just to see what I could make. And I wasn't happy with it. By the way, a lot of today is going to be the not always successful, but giving me fodder for future things. So then I started laying them down, and I threw a spoon down next to it. And then I looked at it and I added a little subtle drop shadow down here. And all of a sudden it wasn't looking down as a flat lay, it was standing up, and it became an interesting compositional exercise. So we're going to start with making bubbles. And I'm going to show you this setup. So I'm going to go through really quick. And of course, for those of you who don't have one, if you don't have a color checker as part of your arsenal, you're all, you should just shake your head and be embarrassed. You all need a color checker, because if you care about color and you care about making your workflow smoother, you want one of those thingers, and I'll talk about that later. But this is the first module. It's how do we shoot bubbles, and this is some of the end results. I'm going to go quickly. And by the way, they don't always have to be right side up. I mean, obviously I'm blowing them from a dish, so it's like this, but why do they have to be? And so we can turn them around, and we can look at the beautiful, interesting, fascinating swirls that come as the light reflects against the surface. And it just becomes beautiful. It almost becomes mesmerizing as it changes for those fleeting seconds. And then for me, it became, lots of people can shoot bubbles, but how do I make them compositionally more interesting? So I started going in, and the other half of the process is that post-processing side. So it's fun shooting, but it's also fun making other things that I couldn't make in real life. I can't blow bubbles and have them suspend from a surface for any controllable period of time. So I must composite images, and it became kind of interesting to me. And there's lots of different bubbles, and we can shoot at extreme magnifications, and we can move up close. and see what's happening. And then even there, let's see what we can create as part of that process. And so this is, you know, the last, and, you know, look how fun it is. So that's shooting bubbles. I think I'm going to keep going, and I'm going to talk about, now let's shoot with liquids, oils, and waters. And again, I'm going to show you how I do it in a few minutes, but I'm going to show you the end results. There's lots of inks. I'll come back to that. There's an aspect of experimentation. This is what it looks like in a nutshell. This is shooting down in glasses. So before you get to a bigger surface and you let huge, you know, landscapes and terrains appear, I suggest you all get either paper cups or plastic cups and plop it down and start mixing and seeing where you get the best results. And working with different inks. So here you're seeing marbling ink on the top and alcohol-based ink in the bottom. And now these are just acrylic inks with water. And this is some of the things that I was able to get as I'm just playing around and looking at what was happening. And you know, had I thought about it, Matt, you suggested I take some video. You know, when I'm in my zone, my photographic zone, I'm not multitasking as well as I should, but at some point I can't. I'm going to come back and we're going to redo this with video, because watching things change in real time is absolutely fascinating. And so as I was putting a drop of alcohol ink, which is what this is, in a water and oil mixture, and you know, the interactions were constant. And so I'm shooting all the time and I'm just staring down with my mouth open and watching how beautiful things became. And it's very much an additive process. In some cases it starts and it doesn't look like anything, and in fact it almost looks like mud or goop, and then you drop in another sort of liquid. You know, if you're starting with water and oil, adding a drop of dishwashing liquid now breaks the surface tension and starts dissolving the oil, which is holding the paints in suspension. And so you start getting wonderful things like this. And it's just chemistry made beautiful, and it's fascinating to me. So this is, you know, just a lot of moving the larger dish that I've got around as I'm looking down to identify interesting things. Here's a whole different kind of set of oil. I'm actually working with Japanese butterfly pea flower tea, which turns blue, but then when you add acid to it, it turns purpley pink. So I was playing with a few drops of oil, which are the tiny little celestial bodies you see, and Japanese butterfly tea. And this is what happens. And then it starts, as I added more acid, things like this. And then all of a sudden this happened, like it just exploded. And I don't remember if I added a little bit of alcohol ink to the acrylics and the acids and everything, but I got something like this and it just blew my mind. And then coming back to more alcohol-based inks. Now here we go to marbling inks. This is incredibly messy, and I don't recommend it unless you really follow the directions well, because the ink does not, you know, marbling ink is intended to sort of be suspended in a liquid. You put an object in and it, you know, the ink adheres to the object, and then you lift it up and it stays. It's more permanent. So if you don't clean up right away, I've ruined many a dish because I didn't follow the directions. But ultimately you get things like this. And so lit from underneath and just playing with literally toothpicks and swirling things became fascinating. So here's one of those early mistakes I was talking about. But, you know, if you zoom in and you start looking at, you know, some of what starts to emerge, I think here I was shooting with a regular macro lens. What I immediately did is I went and I put on some tele extenders, and then I went and I got my bellows and I put my camera on my bellows. And so you start getting closer and closer and things like this begin to emerge. And again, some of these are not beautiful. As those of you who are here are looking at it, I don't want you saying, oh my God, I would never, like, why is he even showing that? I want you to see a creative process. And I want you to start seeing what, if you choose to do this and have a little fun, what you're gonna see yourself. You're gonna end up discovering little things like this. And I ended up putting a notebook beside me and making notes that I dropped in this particular, this is fountain pen ink, and I got some gold ink and dropped it into the oil and the paints, and it started doing something. So now I have a note for a future exploration. And now here's, again, just some ugly paint and oil. But what I started keying in on is how the drop of oil would almost act as a magnifying glass in certain situations. And as we go through, now look at what happened. So we had two bubbles here, and all of a sudden, boom, we have this seismic explosion over here, going back and forth. We have the two main bubbles. If you can see my cursor where I'm moving around, you know, they bumped into each other and they decided to become one. And so those are some of the things that, just as I'm watching it, I'm you know, almost giggling to myself, because it's, you know, just such a distraction from all the other kinds of work I do. So this for me was just absolutely fascinating. And then I dropped in a whole bunch of black ink. So defeating the purpose of the Lightbox, I ended up pulling out a side light. And this is what started to emerge to me. And this, again, is fodder for some future deep exploration into what's possible. Here, more, I want to show you the sequence now. Let me make things bigger. Just look at what's happening in this bubble right here. And then it explodes, and then that one explodes. And then, you know, the things that start happening, and, you know, seen up close. And when you look at some of the tiny little asteroids that are circling this planet and the story I'm telling myself, it's just fascinating. Here, I started using some colored light in addition to the pure beautifulness that is my Kaiser Slim light, to introduce some other colors. And this is what starts to happen. And then here's a whole other approach where I took vinegar and water and combined it, and then just started shaking the dish around and seeing what emerged. And I got totally different patterns. So, you know, just looking at this now in my head, I'm thinking, oh my God, let me go back to that golden ink that I had. That was the calligraphy ink, because it was a little bit more viscous, a little bit more solid. And if I had dropped it in, what would happen? So now, again, I've got exploration. This is literally milk and oil, very simply, with some colored light thrown against it. This is that same image when I dropped in some different inks, like the chemical reactions, you know, things change so dramatically to here and here as I'm just moving the dish around and introducing some currents. Let my Lightroom catch up with the presentation. And so to me, it's just a whole bunch of beautiful, relaxing stuff, you know, some final things where, again, I finally added that gold ink, and I've got some alcohol ink over here, and then I've got some milk and some regular acrylic inks over here, and just watching what happens, and then sometimes going in with an eyedropper with some drops of milk to just introduce some other things, or drops of oil, which are the darker ones, and seeing what happens. So, oops, I don't know what's going on here. There we go. Is that better? Let's do that. So that's some of that. I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to come back to real life, and I'm going to see if there are any questions before I jump into phase 2, which is what the hell did we just see, and how do I do that at home? Any questions?
All right. Yeah, so we got some great questions in here already, and you decide whether you want to answer them now or through demonstration.
Okay.
The first one is from Yvonne. Do you place them directly on the Lightbox, or do you use any protector foil?
Oh no, definitely. I love and I take incredibly good care of my Lightbox. So what I've got is this. I also have plastic cups or glass cups, so you can get anything that you are comfortable washing out and use that as the surface. I also have sheets of glass that, let's see, let me get everything kind of handy. If you're at Home Depots or Lowe's, they sell things like this. So for my large 13 by 19 Lightbox, here's a 16 by 20 sheet of glass. I end up taping the edges, which does two things. One, this glass is not very well finished, so the opportunity to cut yourself is high. So by taping it, it makes it easier to handle, but it also gives me a slight level of, sort of protection. And if I really were thinking, I could build this up and then I could put liquids right on this. So there's just a couple of different ways to do it. Next question.
Debbie asked something similar, which I think you just answered, which is, what's the best way to clean off the Lightbox ever after having things like honey or other liquids on it?
Don't make it dirty. Right. Put a piece of glass over it, which I'll show you in a few minutes. So.
Yeah, she adds that she has the Kaiser Lightbox, and it's wonderful.
Perfect.
The next one was from Gino, which I think you're going to answer. Alan, what is your setup?
Patience.
Welcome back, Gino. Chris asks, do you ever use cross polarization?
No.
Okay. The doctor's in the house, and he asked, after adding drops in a liquid, do you wait or stir?
It depends. Both. So here's the fun part, and I'm gonna give you. Let's jump into the liquid part first. So hopefully you can see all my different oils and vinegars and things over here. Yeah.
Yes.
So where I start my process is with a clear plastic cup and some oil. So I have vegetable oil, I have olive oil, I have canola oil. Every oil has its own, sort of color, and in some cases I'll start with just a little bit of oil, and then this is some acrylic artist ink, and I'll just put a drop or two in. So now it's in oil and it becomes globulized, circular. And so there's something really interesting just about seeing that. I wish you could see it, but this is going to encourage you to do this at home. Then when you add in water or vinegar, you're introducing a whole other thing. So what I would invariably do is I would put some water in this, or some diluted milk if I wanted a milky, a white surface. But again, I'm shooting on a white Lightbox, so I don't need that. Put some water in. Oil and water don't mix, so I would pour this in without mixing it and watch what happens. And then that's the beginning of the process. And then from there, I would start adding other colors. I would come in with more oil, more color, more oil. In some cases, towards the very end, I would introduce dishwashing liquid, because dishwashing liquid dissolves oil. So what you have happening is now you've introduced something that is going to make the oil globules explode. And that's where you get some other kinds of reactions. So the entire process is just magic.
Home fruit science. I love it.
Yeah.
And science. I have one more question, and then we can release you to showing us how you approach this. Ron asks, you mentioned a bellows. Are those required?
No.
And he also further says, is a macro lens alone sufficient in the beginning?
Yes. Well, so is a bellows required? No. Nothing's required, but depending on the effect you're striving for, you want to know ultimately how someone else got there, and you want to either dream big dreams and save up your money, or you want to figure out if there's an alternative solution. So for instance, you can start with a macro lens, or you can start with a regular lens and reverse it, which turns it into a macro lens. And that's, its own solution. You could add extending tubes. You could then go all the way to a bellows. So if you can look over my shoulder, you see my little Fuji has the bellows on it. What that does is it just gives me, it minimizes the focusing distance. And is that exactly right? I'm not sure. I don't want to misquote the information, but it just lets me get that much closer and takes me into a whole other world of extreme magnification without getting into photomicroscopy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right. So there's lots of ways to skin the cat. It depends on how into it you get. That will drive the equipment you choose to add to your tool chest.
Awesome. Well, we got a couple more questions in here, but I think there's a high degree of possibility you will answer them during this demo.
Okay.
So I'm going to hold those and let's see what you got for us.
Okay. So tell me first, can you hear me okay? I know we've got echoing. So here I am in my studio, and is this
Yes,
working?
we can hear you. Yep.
You can. Okay. I'm going to first start with bubbles because that is the fun. So what I'm going to do is I've got a flat surface. By the way, I could do it over here. I could do it anywhere. Feel free to set up wherever you want. I'm putting 4 glasses down because I want a certain amount of distance between my Lightbox, which I'm going to put on top, and the bubble mixture, which is going to be on that surface. Look how beautifully thin this is. So now the sheet is upside down. And in order to really maximize the light and minimize any unnecessary light, voila, a light tint. Dishes. Size changes how the bubbles work. So if you want a really flat, big bubble, go with a bigger dish. But let me stop and give you the recipe for this. 1 cup water, 4 tablespoons of dishwashing liquid. No, 4 tablespoons. Yes, 4 tablespoons of dishwashing liquid, 2 tablespoons of glycerin, which increases the surface tension, makes the bubbles last longer, and a teaspoon of sugar. Super secret ingredient. Some of you may know it, but many of you don't. Again, it all adds to the surface strength, which means that the bubbles are not going to break as quickly as you would think. So my mixture is underneath, my light's right above. Now what you want to make sure you do is get to eye level with your camera. You want to be shooting directly across. Let me go even lower. And here I am going to be perfect. So now you'll notice I am shooting on a tripod that has a leveling head, and I've got a magic ball. So I've got 2 levels of ability to make sure I am flat without changing my legs. So this is how I like to work. Can you hear me okay? And now I am directly across. I'm going to move it to here, just so you can see. And then the stupid fun starts. We get a straw. And we get a beautiful bubble. Hopefully, I may want to move this a little closer. But what you'll see is an incredible amount of colors start to emerge. And all this time, I'll be taking pictures. Now, from a focusing standpoint, what I will invariably do, and the bubble's gone, and so we do it again, I will figure out the midpoint of this, and I will hold a straw or something in, and using autofocus, I will focus on the tip of the straw, because I know that's going to be where the midpoint of my bubble is. And then I will go to manual focus. And then, in many situations, I'll be on a rail, because I don't want to be moving my tripod. But I do want to subtly change focal points once I'm in manual mode. So I know I'm focusing on the middle of the bubble, but then by subtly moving the rail, which moves the whole camera, I'm able to identify different parts of the bubble and see all sorts of magic. So that's how I shoot bubbles. Kind of simple, right? Any questions while I'm here in this mode?
There are a couple. Jim asked, you seem to have a nice source of natural light behind you. Do you use that or flash/constant lights?
It depends on the time of day. So yeah, I am in a totally glass-filled home. And so during the day, I have the benefit of, it's a northern exposure right here and natural light, so it's perfect. But when shooting bubbles, because of this setup, I want no natural light. If I weren't doing this webinar, I would have my overhead lights off. I might pull down my shades because I want as much darkness as possible. I want to control the light. In this case, the beautiful flatness of the slim light just gives me this perfectly beautiful, even, just magical light. And around the surface of the bubble, or bubbles, because sometimes you want to blow multiples. Now you get that very direct source creating all the beautiful colors. Great.
I had Gary and Debbie asked, do you shoot single images or stack?
Do
you focus stack?
I rarely focus stack. I know how to do it. I can teach it, but I don't use it in my own practice because, I'm in relaxation mode, and it's. I find I get a little too tense when I do certain techniques. So.
Understood. And Gino was asking, why is the light box placed upside down?
Because I want the bubble to be lit from the top down. Whoa. Okay. So this is the technique that I use to shoot bubbles.
Right. And Carl just wanted to know more about the rail, please, which I assume you're going to talk a little bit about.
Yes. So here I'm on a table pod with a focusing rail. So now I want you to think about it. When you're sitting with your tripod and you want to move it incrementally, you can't. It's hard. It's kind of impossible to move a fraction of a millimeter. But with something like a focusing rail, I'm just able to slowly and very precisely move back and forth and find different points of focus in the macro world that I spend so much time. Now, the other thing, and I don't have it with me, but there is a cross rail, which is called the Castle Q, which is two rails that are perpendicular to each other. They make a cross. So now I can move not just forward and back and find different focus points in a single plane, but I can also move side to side and front to back. So for me, when I'm in precision mode and I'm in exploration mode, that Castle Cross is like an indispensable piece of equipment in my macro workflow. So there's that question. Anything else?
There's more coming in, but let's pace them out.
Okay. So now let's change completely and go from shooting bubbles. I'm going to get rid of this. To shooting liquids. So, old-fashioned apple box. I use this for a lot of still life surface. I have a whole bunch of things like this. So depending on how high I want it, I'm setting that up. I'm going to take my tripod, I'm going to open it all the way up. Did my clothes. My bad. Okay. So now I'm setting my camera up, looking directly overhead. I'm going to stay with the big. I'm shooting with the Fuji 100. And here I am, flat lay, focusing my screen up. I'm going to be in live view mode. I'm going to get this. I'm going to put it down right on top. And then I'm just going to start pouring liquids and seeing what happens. So here's that bubble tea I told you about. Look at the beautiful color you get. So we'll start with some water. By the way, the depth of water you work with matters. Depending on the inks you use. I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to show you some of the tools before we go back to that. Ready to pour acrylic paint. Needs to be watered down. It's not ready to pour. But when you do, what I like to do is I take more solid paint and I make it as runny as I can to the point before the color starts to fade, before it starts to just get so thin that it loses its pure color. I have acrylic inks like this that come with droppers that are beautiful, particularly the metallics. I find that there's the particulates in the metallic that make it shimmer when it mixes with the oil and the water, and then the underlighting of the Lightbox really does magical stuff. There is Calligraphers Ink, which is a different kind of ink. This is also supposedly acrylic based, but it works differently than these inks. So here's the assignment for those of you who want to try this. Go into a Michael's or a Joann's or whatever craft store is in your neck of the world and look at all of the options and buy a few and experiment. Do your cup exercises where you see what happens when you start mixing different things together. And by the way, this is the marbling ink. I would say stay away from this unless you're super, super confident. There's alcohol ink, which has its own unique properties. Sometimes I work with syringes where I can fill them and inject them. And by the way, I've tried food coloring. Food coloring for some reason does not work. So maybe I'm using the wrong kinds of food coloring. What else? Oh, and then then you just start playing. So what you don't want to do is pour from too high up, because now you're sort of dispensing it. You want to be a little bit more controlled. And now I don't know, I wish you could see this, but again, that's part of the excitement that hopefully has you wanting to go and play at home. So what I've got is a beautiful purple pool in the middle, and then the oil, and then a bunch of individual droplets, and then the oil has created sort of a beautiful light blue and pink slick around it, and things are starting to explode. And all this was some acrylic paint in oil, dropped in some water. And to take it a little bit further, and like it's like they're alive. It's like a petri dish of color, and things are exploding. And now we drop a few things in, and we start looking at the interaction. And that's where you start getting some of those incredibly fascinating things happening. Now, there's a whole other aspect of this. So this is just lit from underneath, and it's beautiful, and the colors are really pure. But then, depending on how thick the mediums that you're using, I've got these wonderful little lights that Phoenix makes. I've got a couple of different sizes of them, and I use these as my side lights. Now, the nice thing about an LED is it's a flat panel, so it's really pure, but I can, at some point, change modes and go to specific colors. And so as I cycle through, you'll see the colors start changing as I'm going through, from 0, I'm going from red to yellow to green to blue and so on through the chromatic wheel and back again. So let me go here to pure white. And now just by putting a light to the side of this and introducing some more oil, now I'm seeing bubbles emerge that this light, because of the side light, starts to make dimensional. So I'm getting some of the hard edges that you saw in some of the earlier examples that I showed you. And it's its own different look. So now I've got a 2-light setup. I've got a backlight or an underlight, and then I've got a side light. And then making sure, by playing with the proportions of light, you're able to see all sorts of things happen, change the color of the entire composition or not, depending on what you want to do. So that's some of how it happens. But I hope you see how easy it was, right? I've just got, whether it's a Pyrex dish or a fancier, glass terrarium vase, which is what this was, Matt. I think you're the one who introduced me to it. Or just some clear plastic, like a party dish that is clear. What I found is the plastic things always have watermarks, and so you will want to avoid that because it limits the area you can shoot in. So for me, because I was so fascinated by this, I went and invested in something that was a little bit more formal. I plan on having a bigger one made, but realize depending on the amount of focus you are looking for, if you want to go extremely tight, if you want to go to a 5 times magnification, or something like that, you don't need much bigger. In fact, you're working in an area that's a few inches across, but you're seeing whole universes emerge. I just happen to like the bigger view because, one, I'm shooting with a larger format camera. I'm shooting with, medium format. So one, I can crop in real tight, and it gives me choices. So how simple was this? How fun is this? How beautiful is it? How relaxing it is. Like, it's de-stress me, distract me, delight me. It does it all. So what else can I tell you now?
My goodness, this is the most active chat I've seen on a webinar in a long, long time, probably since your last webinar, to be honest. So let me just jump right in. There's a ton of questions.
Okay.
Kathleen asks, what are you using as a base below the bubbles on top of the stools?
Oh, that's just, so I have a walk-in closet over there, chock full of surfaces and tiles and racks. So this is a piece of tile. This is just a big old piece of ceramic tile. I think it's from my bathroom, to be honest. That is a beautiful piece of concrete-like ceramic that I love using as a texture. And I have literally dozens and dozens of textures, large and small. So whether you were using a piece of plexiglass on a shooting table, but you saw I just had a couple of metal stools, and it gives me that kind of flexibility, because here, as opposed to in my studio, I want to be spontaneous. So I want to work with what's available. And I don't want it to be too big or too cumbersome. I don't want it to get in the way of the process. When I want to create, when I need to relax, I want to grab a few things, throw them down, and be done, and then immerse myself.
Awesome. The next one was from Mary. Which rail do you recommend?
Oh my God. Well, I love NovaFlex. I think there are levels of any product you want for a macro practice. There are levels. And I have found that the investment I make in NovaFlex, because it is not the cheapest, is absolutely worth every penny. So I recommend NovaFlex. Obviously, I'm here. I love NovaFlex. I've got NovaFlex stuff everywhere. It is built so well and so precisely that nothing else even comes close for me.
I think that you have a Castell Cross Q.
Yes.
You have two, which is two Castell Qs together, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll post a link for I think it was Mary that was asking about that in the chat. And that'll be coming in a minute. So.
Right. And then let me see. Let me show you this. So here I probably pulled everything apart. So here is the bellows that we talked about earlier that just lets me get to extreme magnification. Now it's on, NovaFlex has all these different kinds of tripods. So this is one kind. I don't remember the name, but I use it to hold lights. I use it to, just for certain tabletop. This is another one, which is totally modular where the legs screw off, and it's sort of a variation of what I have behind me. Right? The Triopod. And the thing that I love, probably more than anything, is my magic ball. Let me bring it a little bit closer. So this is the ball head that other ball heads dream about when they go to sleep. So there's that. In terms of the Lightbox, this is the smallest geyser. Wonderful.
The slim light Plano.
Yes. Medium. And you see the big one behind me. My Calibrite version, which is the newest, this is the Color Checker Passport. This is an older one from X-Rite. Calibrite has taken over for X-Rite in our space. This is absolutely essential that everyone have in their bag. This becomes the reference whenever I start any sort of shoot that I care about. This goes down because I can immediately color correct and auto balance and do everything I need to do. And in fact, my workflow is calibrated from my camera, my individual camera and lens, right through to my printers using the tools that Calibrite creates. It's a whole other webinar that we can spend lots of time talking about.
I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll make sure that we get a list of the products that people have asked about and include it in the follow-up email for all the webinar attendees.
Perfect.
We'll post it with the video too.
And then in terms of lights, these are made by Phodex. It's their M1000. The smaller one was the M500. Little ones, big ones, just built like a tank, and you know, these tools come with me everywhere. You know, whether I am in a garden shooting flowers or in a restaurant shooting food, I am invariably bringing whatever the bigger lights that I need, but I always have a slim light Plano or two in my knapsack, because I never know when I'm going to find something that's transparent, translucent, and want to capture it lit beautifully and purely and simply. So I have it in my knapsack, and obviously my tripods are my tripods, so they're always with me.
Man, we could talk about gear all day. Let's hop back to
We don't want to talk about gear. Let's talk about the creative process.
So
what questions can I answer?
Steve asked, are you going to show what you like to add to the bubbles as an example? Is there anything else you add to that bubble formula?
No, well, no, it is water, dishwashing liquid, glycerin, and sugar. Done. Okay. I have played around with food coloring to the water to just see if that makes a difference. But I find I haven't played enough where I've seen it do something miraculous that I wasn't expecting. What I do though, after the fact, is I will take a few different bubbles and I'll bring them into Photoshop and I will photo compose, and I will, you know, set them on screen mode because inherently they're on black. And then I will just start layering and playing and creating interesting compositions, as you saw in the first part, that just bring me that second wave of joy after just the enjoyment of watching it as I'm shooting it.
Right. Do you ever use a ring light?
No.
Okay.
No.
Is there a reason that you is it just a aesthetic preference, or just curious?
Yeah. No. I certainly see plenty of ring lights used in portraiture. I happen not to be, you know, I've got my own recipe for catch lights and eyes when I'm doing portraiture. A ring light, I just think there's so much beauty in light and dark, and a ring light just strips all that away. So it's odd to me, and it's almost, you know, I'm conflicting, because when I shoot with my Lightbox from underneath, that's essentially giving me the same flat, even light, but it's a different look, it's a different feel, and I see it as almost like a blank sheet of paper.
Makes sense. Which
to my creative brain makes sense. A ring light just introduces something different.
Okay. Brian asked, did you say what aperture in general you use to shoot the bubbles, since you don't focus stack?
Okay, I start at f8, and depending on how big the bubble is and how much depth I want. So realize a bigger bubble has more going on, and a littler bubble has less going on. So I will set my aperture based on how much depth I need. I find that I don't ever go wider than 5.6, and I don't ever go narrower than f11. I think f8 is probably my sweet spot.
Okay, thank you. Faith asked, how deep is the water when you use water in these things?
Half an inch. So a couple of reasons. One, it minimizes cleanup, right? The deeper the water, now, so you didn't ask, the aperture with bubbles is one level because of the diameter of the bubble. When I'm shooting straight down, depending on the viscosity of the inks, again, some of it sinks and hits the bottom. And so if I went too deep, I would not be able to hold everything in focus without going to a much a larger aperture, a smaller aperture rather, and then I miss the motion. So I want this combination of, I want to see as much detail as possible, and then I also want to have a very fast shutter speed so that I'm capturing things in the moment that they're exploding. Now, if I wanted to take this up to a different level, or for those of you who are strobe shooters, set your strobes up and watch what happens, and you'll just, you know, it'll take you to a different place.
Understood. Wonderful. The next one comes from Brian. I guess we can post a link to it. That square bowl is cool, but I'm guessing that can be found on Amazon. Where do you find your stuff, Alan?
Anywhere, everywhere. I'm a hands-on guy, and I happen to, living in New York, I have the benefit of like the flower district and being able to, go there to my favorite wholesalers who will save me special bundles of whatever. Right there are the people who make all the vases and glass containers for all the event planners, on the same street as the floral district.
Right.
So there are all sorts of glass containers. I actually have right here, my next challenge is sort of shooting in, this is not really, it is an aquarium, but it's not really an aquarium, shooting liquids, paint into water and doing some underwater photography, but that's a whole other thing and, a little bit more complicated, or at least requires more patience that I didn't have as I was preparing for this webinar. And
right.
So.
Let's see. The next question is, do you ever shoot tethered to your laptop? That's from Anise.
When I'm with clients, yes. When I'm on location, yes. When I'm here, nope.
Okay. Do you ever use Lume Cube or Lytra? No,
I have my Photox lights, and they're, to my mind, better. So that's all. Everyone's got their favorite tools. Just like cameras are subjective. Everything is what you can afford, and how important is it in your workflow?
Gotcha. When using milk, is it just added to water or is it all milk?
It depends. So if I'm shooting backlit, if I'm using my slim light, I will water it down because I want to maintain translucency.
Right.
If I am not using that, I'm just playing, I will use it full strength. Again, different looks. And that's part of the experimentation that I want you to all, for those of you who are interested, I want you to try. I want you to look at the difference between heavy cream and milk and watered down milk. I want you to look at, in some cases, you may have milk substitutes, oat milk and coconut milk and whatever. Look at all of those, just like you're looking at all the inks, because everything is going to have its own level of effect, particularly when you're mixing it with vinegars. So I found that white vinegar versus distilled vinegar gives me a different level of globularization when I mix it with oil or, so I've got all sorts of things. And also there's different colors. So, sesame oil, if you're a fan of Asian cooking, versus avocado oil, there's all these colors. And so you can make art just with oils and water and pushing them around with toothpicks or whatever your tiny little utensil is.
Do you ever use almond milk?
Personally, no. I'm a hazelnut milk guy, but I'm sure it's delicious, and I'm sure it would be fascinating with with inks.
Okay, Greg asked, for the oil and water setup, are the bubbles moving, and what shutter speed do you suggest?
So invariably, I'm changing my ISO to make sure that my shutter speed is the inverse of my lens focal length. So I'm shooting it, in this case, because medium format, my macro is 120, right? So 1/120th of a second. So in some cases, I may be ISO 600, ISO 800. Again, medium format, film grain is kind of non-existent at those low ISOs.
Yeah.
So there's
Go
ahead.
Go ahead. No, you continue, please.
There's no, the magic is, I imagine we have some experts who are shaking their heads and saying, no, I would do exactly this. And we have some beginners who are just wondering, please tell me exactly what to do. And for those beginners, I would say start at f8 and look for the inverse of your lens length. So 1/120th, 1/110th if you're shooting on a regular DSLR and so on. Actually, I think my macro was an 80. I went the other way. And then move your ISO so that you can achieve that. Focus in autofocus on an object if you're shooting bubbles. Then click into manual so you know that's locked. and then just watch and marvel and shoot away, and then blow some more and see what happens. Another thing I've done is I will fill a glass teacup or a champagne flute with bubble mixture and blow it and let it overflow and capture that. Obviously, I have to move the light box to a certain height to accommodate whatever the object that I'm lighting from above.
Gotcha.
So there's all sorts of things you can play with, including putting bubbles. If you create a thick enough mixture, putting an object down and then just spooning bubbles on top of it. It's very unpredictable. You have to be very patient. But if you get to that right level of viscosity, you can spoon your bubbles onto other things and have them hold, no different than you can take a bubble and freeze it outside. So
that's funny. That was the question that AC Brown had. How do you blow the bubbles? With a straw?
Yeah, with a straw.
Okay.
I am partial to very colorful, bendy straws, but it's plastic. And so there's a part of me that says I should go to a metal straw just to conserve the environment. So I plan on doing that. For those of you who don't think that I care, I do.
Do you ever use a polarizer filter?
Of course, doesn't everybody? But I don't necessarily use it here because I don't need to. What would I'm curious, the person asking the question, what would a polarizing filter do when shooting bubbles, other than maybe minimize some of the colors and the reflectiveness? And I want to pull that out. I want to see it.
Okay, we'll see. We will see. Yeah, we will see. We'll see if we get an answer from the doctor on that one. Janice commented, I've used different oils because they all have different weights. Have you found that avocado oil or another oil is better for oil and water macro?
Better? No, just different.
Yeah.
That's right. I imagine I could get motor oil and that would be something else entirely. So that's the fun of this. There's no definitive right or wrong answer. It's just what you have available and how far you want to push it.
Right. Right. So I'm just gonna turn my camera on for a second and say, there's people are asking whether we're gonna take pictures and show them during this today.
No.
Yeah, there was a tethering setup that we had, but unfortunately the cable went bad right before the webinar. We apologize for that. But Alan did show a lot of pictures right at the beginning, and those are exactly what he made with the same kind of setups that he's describing. And I as we said at the beginning, Alan's definitely trying to prime you guys to create a space that's creative. And a lot of this is about preparing to be creative. So thank you for bearing with us on that. We would have loved to show you some tethered shots, and perhaps we'll come back and do that again in the future.
Yeah. Okay.
And thank you for all those questions about that, everybody. We appreciate it. Alan, do you have a class on color calibration?
Not yet, but it's definitely in the works, and people can follow me on Facebook or Instagram, and that's where I post all my classes. So I think we should put one in the works and just get it done, because it is so important for those of you who care about color that you make your workflow as optimized as possible.
Totally agree. John asked something about some other work you've shown in the past. Do you shoot the flowers directly on the slimline plano?
It depends. Sometimes I will have the slimline upright and I'll put the flower on what's called a flower frog. Other times I will be shooting down in a flat lay format. It depends on how dimensional the flower is. It depends on how much dimension I want to introduce to the flower. There are times I want just, if the flower is arcing toward you, I may want just the blossom of the flower, and I may want to, with a very shallow depth of field, and throw the stem and any leaves totally out of focus, which on white can be beautiful, very different than taking something and just laying it down. It's a totally different look and feel. So you should try both.
Yeah. My gosh, there is so many questions here. I think we're going to be answering emails after this, and it will inspire future sessions. So you are officially invited back, Alan.
Thank you.
A lot of these questions are about how to put certain things together or certain types of things and mixing them up. So I don't know if you want to continue answering those things.
Yeah, I mean, hit me with a few, as long as it's not, you know, if
do you ever play with
boring, I'm here till you all are done with me and feel like you got what you needed.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Alan. Bonnie asks, do you ever play with oils and water in vertical mode?
When you say in vertical mode, meaning
vertical glass containers.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I remember as a kid having a very skinny thing that had like oil and water and sand, and you could rotate it and like it would move in slow motion. And so it's hard for me because I don't have the ideal container anymore, but I plan on making like a 1-inch wide but very tall container and experimenting with layering different liquids and seeing what happens, and then pouring heavier liquids through it and watching the interaction. We've all seen like slow motion ink dropping into water and how beautiful it becomes. And then when you can invert it and they become trees from the movie Avatar, if you remember, and you know, it's otherworldly. And likewise shooting smoke. Right. So that's a whole other thing that is just incredible to play with. It uses the same techniques, right? You just have a light either behind, on the side, above. You're pouring things and you're just watching what happens with, in this case, the translucency. So
awesome. Steve asked, how do you clean up when using paints with glass and water? It scares me because I have a cat.
Me too, Steve. And it's a lot of trips to the sink. And if you have when I'm done, invariably I have taken it too far. I've taken it to a place where it's sludge, right? Because it's not done till it's done, until I can't see anything through, or until the interactions stop. And then I've just got a bunch of brown goop, and I bring it over to the kitchen sink, which is a big metal sink, and I pour it very carefully down the drain. And then, lest my wife-to-be come and hit me over the head, I clean up very promptly. So the cleanup probably takes more than the shooting because I have to be very careful. Paper towels are your friends. Glass is your friend. So it's a lot of trips back and forth, but it's worth it. It's so worth it.
Yeah. When you freeze bubbles, do you blow them in the cold and photograph them as they freeze up, or blow indoors and bring outside?
Well, here's the trick with freezing bubbles. You need a really thick bubble mixture, meaning you may want to up the glycerin and add a little bit more sugar. And I don't have a definitive recipe. And you need to be in a place where there's no wind, because you want the extreme cold and you want stillness. So with that in mind, I will open up my sliding doors on a non-windy, super cold day with my dish, and I will blow, and it will freeze before my eyes, and I will be taking lots of pictures, and that's how you do it. The trick is the right environment, the right level of non-windiness and extreme coldness. So it happens very quickly, and you need good gloves.
Well, it was 9 degrees in Catskill this morning.
Perfect. So if it were 9 degrees and still like that perfect time, then walk outside. I mean, I've literally, on a big ladle, blown a bubble and just put it outside and just watched it freeze, and didn't even, because I'm holding it, didn't even have my camera, just because I love the process. I just love watching it. Sometimes I get so mesmerized that I forget to take a picture. Hard to believe, but true.
All right. So here's we're winding down. Actually, this was the best Q&A I've had in a long time. Tom asks, how do you use the butterfly tea? Do you use the leaves?
No. I mean, you can. It's quite tasty. So let me. Do I have it? I do have it. See, be prepared. So it comes like this, and it's butterfly pea blossoms. You put it in water, and then if I had lime juice or lemon juice or a squeeze, I would strain this out. And I don't know if you can kind of see the color. It's this beautiful purpley blue. When I put in acid, any sort of acid, so I suppose, you know, lemon juice, lime juice, any other chemical, it will change color. It is a bartender specialty. Whenever you see crazy colored drinks, invariably there's some butterfly PT involved, you know, with some mixture of citrus and then the alcohol. It layers beautifully. So if you've ever seen layered drinks, I love working with bartenders because, you know, any sort of creative mind that is playing in a different medium than I am, that I get to photograph and then drink, it's happiness. So this is butterfly tea. Get rid of the leaves and play.
Awesome. Yvonne asked, have you tried also mixture of nail varnish?
No. Nope. Nail varnish.
As in painting your nails. Nail polish, yep.
Nail polish.
Yep.
No.
I'm guessing. Yeah, I'm inferring. Yeah.
No, but Yvonne, that's a great idea, and I'm going to go play later. So thank you.
Nice. Nice. Well,
and you should too, and you should share the results.
Yeah. Speaking of playing together, Brenda and I were chatting in the background during this, and in addition to confirming that you're invited back, I'm going to let everybody know how you're invited back, and Alan's going to find out live here. Alan's going to come on up to the studio here, and we're just going to make this big old multicam production, and we're going to be able to see through his camera and see other angles and stuff, and a lot of this stuff that you saw here is going to be done bigger and better. So that's what we're going to do, is we're going to have Alan up to Catskill and do a big production of this. So
excellent.
Yeah, I hope you accept, Alan.
Done.
Cool.
Done.
So Alan, thank you for being so generous with your creativity, your time, your talents, your thoughtfulness. We appreciate you.
Thank you. And I appreciate everyone who spent a little bit of time and let me share, because I love this. We're all in this together. And if nothing else, we could all use a little bit of something that makes us smile. Yeah. And as I say at the end of everything, all my teaching, if you're not smiling, you're doing something wrong.
Truth.
Right?
So. Have a great day, everybody. We'll see you at the next webinar. There's going to be, the next webinar is going to be in February. Christian Domek is coming back. He and I are doing another macro challenge, and this time it's with magnetism. Roll that around in your head. So
it's awesome. I've seen some sneak previews. It's so good. You should all go.
It's going to be fun.
Yeah.
It's going to be fun. So look forward to it. Alan, until next time in Catskill, thank you.
See y'all.
All right. Take care, everybody. Have a great day.